I'm a Native American from Monroe, Louisiana. 2 years ago, during the summer, my late husband and I had a shocking incident with the Bigfoot in the woods behind his parents' home in Natchitoches, Louisiana. We had hiked about 4 to 5 miles. He had his gun and shot off some shells while walking along the hiking trail. I remember hearing small rocks landing around me. Then suddenly we heard a horrible loud yell, screech or howl. Not sure how to describe it, but we stopped and looked at each other with wide eyes. Scared, we began to walk faster. All of a sudden we heard it again, only this time it was a lot closer and way louder. We ran as fast as we could. I didn't want to see what made that sound, but I already knew what it was. It was Bigfoot. I'll never forget the way it sounded and the terror I felt. We didn't realize how far we had walked until finally we made it to the highway. We were about 3 to 4 miles past his parents' house. We just figured it had felt threatened from the sounds of the bullets being shot. Eventually, we shared this with his parents. They said people had many sightings of Bigfoot in the area. Also, that people were complaining about seeing them looking through their bedroom windows and doors. We went back into that area the next day and found footprints and took casts. I have included the pictures. Doc Waters, it was great to sit down with you and talk about my experience. I really enjoyed my time at the cigar bar with you. You are a true professional, and I wanted to follow up our conversation with my encounter in writing. It was Thanksgiving 2013. I went deer hunting in the area of Little Black Creek, Mississippi. I entered the woods before daylight and walked down the access road into the pine forest. While walking, I began hearing this grunting sound on the ridge line above me. It was faint at first, then it became louder. I could hear grunting and heavy footsteps as something moved down the ridge line and across the access road about 150 yards behind me. I quickly moved to a tree and sat still, listening. Then I heard a series of tree knocks, followed by the sound of a deer crying out in pain. From that moment on, everything went silent. I just sat there against that tree until first light. Then I got the hell out of there. A month ago, I shared my first Bigfoot encounter with you and promised to share more. As you know, I worked as a construction engineer for a major utility company in Arkansas. This encounter happened one evening when I was in the area of Mountain Home, Arkansas. This is a very rural area of the state, and I was scouting the right-of-way for a power line from Bull Shoals to Mountain Home, Arkansas. Bull Shoals is a very small town that sits along the White River. I was along the riverbank checking the soil when I first noticed a trail of huge footprints leading into the water. These prints were at least 16 inches long, as I wear a size 12 men's shoe. This day, I was accompanied by an African-American engineer from New Orleans named Frank. Frank was a city boy and didn't particularly care for being in the woods at all. He was jumpy from the time we entered the wooded area. I pointed out the prints to Frank, who was a massive individual. He played football for Louisiana State University and wore a size 14 boot. As we both stood there discussing the prints, he kept staring into the wood lines behind me. When I asked him what was wrong, he just said he thought he saw someone move behind a tree. We walked the riverbank for the next 2 hours, taking soil borings and trying to decide where we would place the poles that would span across the river. That's when I first heard what sounded like a bird calling from the opposite side of the riverbank. Then I heard another call from behind us in the woods. Frank, being a city boy, was completely oblivious to the sounds of the woods, but I knew immediately that something was wrong. The calls went on for a few more minutes and then stopped. However, the sounds were not right. These calls were too breathy and deep to be a bird. After all, I've been in the woods of Arkansas all my life, and I had never heard anything like this. before we started working our way back up the riverbank towards the trail we walked in on. But as we got closer, the calls started again. Frank was sensing something, and he asked me what was wrong. Honestly, I didn't know at the time, but I suspected there were 2 Sasquatches in the area. I just told him it was time to get out of here. Walking along the bank of the river, we both started to hear something paralleling us in the bushes. These were clear footsteps. As we walked, it would walk. And when we stopped, it would stop. I started to get the feeling we were being hunted. It stayed out of sight in the tree line, but something was there. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a large rock flying right over our heads. It landed in the river, making a huge splash. Now, there was no denying that something was going on, and it was getting out of hand. After my first encounter with the crazy people in the Devil's Hollow, I never went into the woods without my weapon. Today, I had my .380. I could tell Frank was having a hard time processing what was going on, but what happened next made him quickly realize that we were in danger. We heard a loud tree break. Not the sound of a dead tree, but the sound of a fresh, living tree break. It was so loud, it made my heart skip a beat. As we both turned towards the sound, an enormous tree branch came flying at us. I pulled Frank to the ground, dodging the tree branch, stood up, and fired a shot in the air, hoping to scare the creature off. The sound of the shot left my ears ringing. Then things went silent. Frank was now in total shock. His eyes were wide open, pupils dilated. He held on to a stick as if that would do us some good. Just as my ears were starting to recover from the sound of the gunshot, then came the roar. Oh my God. The sound was so powerful, it completely stunned my nervous system. It was like an electronic pulse had short-circuited my body. Then the creature stepped forward out of the tree line, as if it was letting us know who was the alpha male in this territory. Body frozen, arms shaking, I stood there looking at Bigfoot. This creature was something out of a movie. It had the upper hand, and it knew it. Frank yelled at me to shoot it, but the cold stare in his eyes told me that if I was to take a shot at this thing, it would be the last thing I would do. The .380 I had would do absolutely nothing to this creature. It was every bit of 10 feet tall, 800 pounds, and sheer muscle. Its deltoid muscles were the size of my head, and its trapezoid muscles were so large it engulfed its neck. His legs were enormous. And yes, I could tell it was a he. It had black hair and black skin. You could see the definition in its arms and legs, but the most frightening thing was the intent in its eyes. I got the feeling that it had killed humans before and would do it again if we did not get the hell out of there. So we ran as fast as we could. For the first 45 yards, I could hear the sounds of trees breaking as it paralleled us along the tree line. I was no young man at this time, but I hauled ass. Frank, who was very athletic, was well ahead of me. He didn't look back, and to this day I don't blame him. Then, just as suddenly as it all started, it stopped. My heart was beating fast, and I felt dizzy. Things were getting blurry as I struggled to jog along the riverbank. By now, Frank was out of sight. I was alone, and feeling like I was going to have a heart attack. In that instant, my mind fell into despair. I knew that this Bigfoot was going to drag me off into the woods, but instead, Frank came to my rescue. Through my blurred vision, I saw the white heavy-duty pickup truck we drove in come flying through the tree line, landing along the riverbank, almost splashing into the water. He sped up to me, dirt and mud flying through the air. Frank jumped out, helped me in a truck, and sped off away from the area. Oh my God. Thank you, I said. Frank just smiled and said, I'm not a punk-ass bitch that would leave you. I was going to ram that motherfucker. He was laughing as if he had lost his mind. In that moment, I figured he pretty much had. We didn't talk about it on our way back to the motel rooms. We just rode in silence. That night, We smoked and drank and got drunk as hell. When he did finally talk, what Frank shared with me was so frightening that I was at a loss for words. I thought the creature had stopped chasing me, but looking back on it, it was never after me, it was after Frank. Frank said the creature kept following him along the wood line as he ran along the riverbank. In order to get back to the truck, he had to run straight uphill into the wood line. He decided that if he didn't make it to the truck, we both would die. So he cut into the woods and ran as fast as he could, dodging trees and down tree limbs. The Bigfoot was running him down on a diagonal, 60 yards away from the truck, and it was closing in. He said it moved like a college linebacker as it knocked over trees that were in his way. 30 yards away, and he could smell it. It smelled like wet hair, dead animal, shit. 10 yards, it's closing in on him. He can't look back. He dives to the right of the truck, trying to put it between him and the creature. As he hits the ground, Bigfoot rams into the truck, turning it towards him, and his body ends up under the truck. Frank slides to the opposite side, opening the passenger door, jumps in, cranks it up, and hits the gas pedal with his hands, driving forward, trying to get away. He hit small trees and bushes, and after a minute of driving blind, he jumped behind the wheel and drove to the riverbank looking for me. Frank and I became very close after this event. He was severely traumatized for years, and we both submitted this story to the BFRO. They interviewed Frank and I and tried to convince us it was a bear. I know what a bear looks like. This was no bear. It was a Bigfoot, an aggressive, evil Bigfoot.